Welcome back, everybody, to Theo Thoughts. It is a wonderful, beautiful day here. Got Jordan. How you doing, man?
I'm good, Judd. It's a pretty good morning. I'm a
Yeah.
little sniffly. No, it's
Mm,
pollen season, but
yeah,
storm last night, sunny skies this morning,
it's usually
and
how it
we're in
goes.
good moods, good
Yeah.
graces.
So, know y'all have been waiting for the results from round 2. So, between parting the Red Sea and Elijah against Baal, by almost a factor of double the amount of votes, we have parting the Red Sea.
Wow.
Yeah, so still anticipating that to be the crowd favorite. But then with Pentecost and the fall of Jericho, by a factor of just 20%, we have the fall of Jericho.
What?
Surprisingly.
That is crazy to me.
Yeah.
That is absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, Pentecost was my favorite to move forward, but we have two Old Testament and sort of in the same like aura of things that are going up in the final. So I'm super excited to see that. But I've realized, and we talked about this at the very beginning, that there were a bunch of miracles that were left out. And there's probably people who have come and talked to you, as they have to me,
my mom's
about
had
like
a couple words.
about where are these miracles? You know, where is creation? Where is the birth? Where is the resurrection? And we talked about in round 1 that it wouldn't be totally fair. So we wanted
God.
Exactly. So we wanted to have an episode about miracles in a whole, sort of as like a honorable mention, but these aren't honorable mentions. These are like you win if you mention them sort of things. And we actually brought on a guest introducing Nick Christ.
Welcome.
Hey guys, my name's Nick, just in case you don't know me. I'm student chaplain here at Greenville, and I'm excited to join you guys.
Yeah. So,
surprise.
Yeah. So
you didn't see that coming.
Nick, what's your opinions on just these couple miracles that we mentioned? So parting the Red Sea, fall of Jericho, which one sticks out more to you? Just out of curiosity.
I think between those two, parting the Red Sea sticks out more to me. That's my vote for the winner personally.
Okay.
Just because I feel like that both of these are kind of like Sunday school kind of stories that we hear, you know, but I feel like that just like the image of literally the seas parting, like splitting in half, people walking through, like that imagery of God's power, I think is so amazing that's why it has to win for me.
Strong opinions.
Facts. I like that a lot. You know, I was at class the other day for Science Christianity with Dunkley.
Nice.
And he was like, well, we haven't really had a class period where you guys can ask us questions. Ask me questions, as he was referring to himself. And so I went inside to go to the restroom, but really I shot basketball because we had class outside. So I shot basketball for a couple minutes and then came back out, and everybody, they had already hit the juicy questions, but I had a few. And then I talked to him. I said, well, so as like a scientist, do you believe that all the miracles in the Bible happened as they're written down? Or do you think that there's a scientific explanation, for example, the parting of the Red Sea? And he had said something, and I want to get your guys' 2 cents about this.
Okay.
He had said something about how if the wind touches a water for a long enough amount of time, no matter how cold it is outside, the water will freeze. So his 2 cents were that, in the Bible and the verses before the splitting of the Red Sea, whenever he puts his staff down into the water, said the wind blew all night long. And you know, there was the fire thing behind them. And he said basically that he thinks that the wind hit the water in such a way that it did split, but it was actually the water freezing on both sides.
Interesting.
So they were able to walk through between frozen walls of water instead of like moving walls of water that got separated. And then they made it to the other side, and as the Egyptians went in after them, the water thawed.
That'd actually be pretty cool, and I think that'd even add to the magnitude of the miracle because, like, so this is Egypt, so desert and sand, and then imagine not only just seeing floating walls of water, but water flowing up and then just
freezing.
Hardening. That'd really add to the spectacle for that.
You're right.
Yeah, I don't really mind kind of looking at miracles through a scientific lens because I feel like that science is like a gateway to understanding God better. You know, it's how we understand God's creation. So I think that's interesting. I've never heard that before, but I don't know if I personally believe that though, because it's like, well, when else have we seen something like that happen where like both the sides freeze, you know, or something like that? Like, I think that in some miracles, like there could be scientific explanations. I don't want to dismiss that explanation because this is my first time hearing about it. So yeah, I don't want to immediately dismiss it. But I think that miracle, the parting of the Red Sea, for me is one where it's like, I don't know if there really is an explanation besides just like God's power, and like God's hand in guiding his people through and protecting them.
Yeah. That reminds me, last semester I had to take General Chemistry 1, which I hated in high school, and I didn't hate it as much this time, but we had to write a faith reflection paper at the end of the semester and get some extra credit points. So I was trying to think. The paper's goal was to like tie chemistry and Christianity together. So chemistry, one of the sciences. So I was trying to think, and I thought of the miracle that we've talked about, Jesus turning water into wine.
Yeah.
And so I kind of I dived into that because I was like, okay, how chemically impossible or possible would this miracle have to be? So like for the chemical makeup of water to be turned into the chemical makeup of wine.
Yeah, it's
And
not like
so
you just throw a Kool-Aid pouch in there.
Right. So I made this equation. Maybe I'll throw it on the screen. But basically, you have some carbon dioxide and you have some water on one side of the equation. And then on the other side, you have ethanol, which is the key thing in alcohol. And then some water and some extra oxygen molecules. And so basically, this is saying that CO2, which is what we breathe out, Jesus's words, and water, that was what we had to start with. We had some water and we had Jesus's words. And then somehow through his speaking allowed this reaction to happen because the elements are there. But of course, in order to make wine, you need yeast and you need rising and fermenting and this long period of time. And so I wrote about how there must have been something really special, some other unknown reagent about the CO2, about Jesus's words that allowed the water to change into wine like that.
Yeah.
And so, but as you said, looking into the science of the miracles, it doesn't take away from the miracle, but I think what I was trying to do was show that Jesus's words, his carbon dioxide that he spoke out, had immense power to manipulate the natural world.
Yeah. And I think that's what's kind of beautiful about it, because in this bracket, we said that one of the stipulations is that it's like awe-inspiring, that it looks powerful, that it shows the power of God.
Right.
But there's a plethora of miracles in the Bible that are sort of small on the scale, like Jesus turning water into wine. Like, okay, he turned water into wine.
Yeah.
But it's astronomical because he didn't have the ingredients. Like for the walls to fall completely, like, okay, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's great and that's awesome. But for example, the snake in the desert during Exodus, again, that's a really, really crazy one, but no one talks about it. Not really.
Yeah.
What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I think that there are some of these like smaller miracles that no one talks about, and then there's like the larger miracles. And I really like learning about both. I think that they're both interesting because one, it's like, well, it's nothing that we can do, which already makes it interesting. Like this is something that's unique to God, these miracles. And so no matter if they're like the smaller ones, like Jesus turning water into wine, or quote unquote smaller, or like something huge like the resurrection, I think that they're always kind of fascinating to
for sure
learn more about and like question too, like how could this happen, and so like diving in like what you were doing, Judd, like how could Jesus turn water into wine, like what would that look like, but I think for me, I'm kind of like under the belief that I don't know if there really is an explanation, that like God is so powerful that like it can literally just like happen. Like there doesn't even need to be like a process to it. There doesn't need to even be a scientific explanation. Although there can be, I think God can use like the forces of nature to create a miracle. But I think that like a lot of miracles that God does, it's just like an all-out expression of his power. It's only something that he can do. Therefore, it just like happens, like there's not even really an explanation for it.
Right.
Because I feel like almost if you could explain it, that it could happen again without God. Like if there was a scientific explanation for it, there's a chance that like God wasn't involved in that, And so I do want to bring that up, that like I almost think that sometimes, and I'm all on board on bringing in science and Christianity because I really do think that they're a pair.
Yeah.
But almost sometimes I think that whenever we look at things too scientifically, the miracles, I think that it can almost discredit what God has done.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. I think that's how we get haymakers in science, because you're right. Science and Christianity do go together, because the Lord has given us science for our puny human brain to try to understand his creation.
Mhm.
But one of the things that are up in the air mostly is, and what you're talking about, is his creation. You know,
Yeah.
whenever you give humans the ability, whenever you give humans the ability to think for themselves, have free will, you will have times where you take God out of the equation, which is where we come to a
Yeah.
lot of the scientific theories that we have today.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the plagues and, what Pharaoh and his people were saying, just like, oh, well, the frogs came out, so then of course the bugs had to come out. And of course the bugs are going to go in the livestock. Like, that's all just order of events. Like, but then we get to the fiery hail. It's just like, well, ice on fire.
Yeah, that's an oxymoron.
That
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense. And I think also what's really powerful about a lot of these miracles, like one that comes to mind is the lady who just touched Jesus's cloak and was healed. And like we kind of talked about the miracle of people being healed just by Peter's shadow, because I think with a lot of these miracles, seldom do they happen without a show of faith for something. Like with we talked about Elijah, like he had smugness faith that just like, this is not getting shaken by anything. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like complete faith no matter what happened. And even Moses, though tentative he may have been, he still put his rod in the water expecting the waters to go up. And so all of these powerful things, they come down to faith. And like the woman, like just touching, like that would be like if I just touched your pants or touched your shirt or something, just expect like, oh yeah, if I do that, I'm gonna just get healed. Nobody in their right mind today would think that. Like nobody's gonna think like, oh yeah, if I just go and I just bump shoulders with this person, I'm gonna be healed. We don't think like that anymore. And I think part of that is because as we have continuing to science, now being an engineer, of course, I'm surrounded by science and I have to think about it all the time. And I love the pairing of science and Christianity. But with how many things we have discovered today, we understand how rainbows work. We understand how that it is light refracting through water particles. But in my opinion, does that make them any less beautiful? Does that, make me forget God's promise? No, not at all. I still understand the beauty of it. Like, and I can sit back for a second like a child and just gaze in awe at the rainbow. Even if I understand every little bit of how it works, that does not take anything away from like God's awe and wonder.
Judd, I agree with what you said about like faith and that being like an essential part of miracles. Well,
Yeah.
actually, I don't want to limit that to being like every time there's a miracle, there has to be some amount of
Right.
faith,
That's why I said seldom, not
but
all the time.
but I do agree with you though that like a lot of times, like whenever miracles happen, it comes out of faith. And I think that it relates back to the Bible. Like, what the Bible says, like faith the size of a mustard seed. That's what you need,
Yeah.
To
and
move
then, like,
mountains.
literally, yeah.
Mhm.
And so I think that's interesting to think about. And I think that like you see people using faith like that to do miracles even today.
Yeah.
I think that I think that like it's so awesome talking about like the miracles in the Bible, because those are like documented miracles. It's
Right.
like we know exactly how it happened.
Yeah.
The story of it. But like there's even so many like miracles that God is doing today, even just in our own lives.
I would so that kind of segues into a question I was thinking. So how do miracles happen today? This is open for all of us.
I would say honestly that and I was just thinking about this as Nick was speaking, that I feel like miracles happen at maybe not as an astronomical of level at like how great they are, but I feel like smaller miracles happen more often than they did back then.
Yeah.
And it's possible to just kind of write them off as coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence personally, but I think it's easier for us to write it off because like you think about it back then, for a person to be randomly healed from an ailment would be like they didn't have the medicine to do that.
Right.
They didn't have the wherewithal to know exactly what to do. Like there's no way Jesus could have turned water into wine, right?
Yeah.
But if you think of somebody who broke their leg today getting off their bike, and the next day they're healed. For example, my buddy Lamar, he had a back problem and had someone pray for him. Woke up, his back was totally fine.
Mm.
So you put that in the book back in the day, you're like, oh, this is one of the great miracles of the Bible. You know what I mean? One of those things happens today. It's like, oh, it's a coincidence, or maybe like my back realigned itself. And for some reason, I feel like human beings are innately put in a position to almost accept a reality that is less than like the obvious one, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I'd
You
say
sort of getting my vibe.
kind of piggying off of that. So, we have examples of Jesus healing the blind, healing the sick, putting somebody's ear back on their face. And it makes me think, like, today, people completely snap their legs into, and then they can have that leg back just as normal in, however long it takes. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how long that takes.
Couple months,
Couple months.
a year maybe.
If you break your leg back then, with bone sticking out of your leg, sorry, you don't have a leg anymore.
You might be dead.
Yeah. But the fact that we can do this today, and like, because a lot of hospitals, they started as Christian things, like St. John's. Like, a lot of hospitals start as saints because they originally started as Christians getting together to take care of the sick. And so I would say, every time a broken leg is healed, every time somebody's back is healed, ear reattached, you can cut off your finger, bring it back in an ice pack, and then have your finger back. Tell me that's not a miracle. Like, yes, we understand it, but does that take anything away from how awesome it is?
I think it's like what you said about the rainbow, where it's like, I can understand like how a rainbow works, but whenever I look at that rainbow, it's still just as beautiful.
Right.
Yeah. Why is it that whenever we have a natural explanation, we discount the metaphysical, the supernatural?
I think it's because, like, whenever it's something that you don't understand, like, obviously you don't understand it, and so like there's I think even more awe, because it's like, that's crazy. Like, how could this even happen? Like, that's so wild. Where like, if you have the explanation, it's like, well, this is exactly how it happened, like piece by piece. I think that sometimes that can take away from it, but also I agree with what you were saying before, Judd. I think sometimes that can, like, leave it the same. Like, I feel just as like much about it as I did before, or it can even add to it. It's like, now that I understand this, now that I understand how God works, in this way, like, it makes me appreciate God even more. Because I see all these like details, and it's like, wow, like our God has like fine-tuned the earth, like to that degree. And then it's crazy.
Well, have you ever sat down like at a computer and been like, wow, have you sat down at your computer and all of the great software that we have in here, and then been like, wow, this stuff all works? Like, we're able to talk into we're able to talk into a microphone that then relays the sound into this machine over here, which then picks it up in your computer via this little cord here, or the cord on the other side. It's kind of crazy, right? And we take advantage of that. And now that we know, you see what I mean?
I think it reminds me of the epilogue of Job, because Job feels like he knows everything at this point, which is often a thing of today. Like, we feel like, oh, there's like very little that we don't know about. I mean, we still admittedly don't know about a lot of things, like dark matter, but we are very cocky human beings. Amen. And when we get to this level of cockiness, also kind of like Tower of Babel type cockiness as well, we can then, really start to take things for granted, or think that, oh, well, again, there's just natural explanations for everything. And, then it can suck the joy. Like, I imagine, like, certain scientists I think of one of our professors here who taught me calculus, the kind of passion on fire he gets for math, like being at a doctoral level of understanding of math and physics, but still takes just as much joy in going to church and worshiping. And I like to look at that and think, wow, he can still have that, he can still have that joy, as opposed to like feel like some scientists, when they get into the sense of like, oh yes, I know everything, and not just scientists, people too, then it takes the joy out of discovery. And like, because we think of the end of Job, Job is coming here just like, okay, I know all of these things to be true, so why the heck is this happening? And God's just like, do you know when the dew's going to start? Do you know when that doe is going to give birth? Do you know any of these things that he had no idea of at this time? Now, some of those things we do know, but still, the things of like there is still so much that you don't know, so much that you do not understand about how complex I'm running things. Like you were talking about, like the finely tuned Earth, the finely tuned universe, like being able to dive deeper into how complex it is. It's not just as simple as we're the center of the universe and the sun and moon are going around us. It is so much more complex, and God did that for us. And I just think that that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that you're talking about one of your professors and like the amount of joy that he still has, like years into like teaching and understanding
Mm-hmm.
math, like the joy that he has to like expressing his faith. And you know whenever someone does something for so long, like we expect it to become redundant, and we
Yeah,
expect it to like I don't know, yeah, you just like don't get the same joy
just
out of it that
mundane.
like yeah, exactly. But I think that's why we're called to have a childlike faith,
Yeah.
because you ever see like a child who's on fire for Jesus, like
Mm-hmm.
they are so excited to learn about Jesus, and they're so excited to go to like Sunday school and to hear the stories and stuff like that. And that's how we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's like kind of the model.
Yeah, for sure.
This might sound weird, but it kind of reminds me of the Lego movie. You guys have seen the Lego movie?
I
Yeah.
love the
So
Lego
like
movie.
they live in their own little world. Like so imagine all human beings are Emmett going from
Okay.
your day to day, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
goes and buys $37 coffee. And I guarantee like
Not too
within the
far
like
off.
even though it is the Lego world, he was able to explain like what coffee is.
Yeah.
There's a natural explanation for what coffee is. But then towards the end of the movie, he falls out of like the Lego world into like the
Yeah.
natural world where he sees like the real people,
Yeah.
and then his entire perception of reality is changed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what is like our segue into that. So in within his own Lego world, and I'm still piecing this together in my head, so forgive me if it makes zero sense, but within his own Lego world, you can explain everything. You can explain, I mean, even the most supernatural things would be like the master builders, right?
Mm.
So in relation to our world, like there's natural explanations for a lot,
Yeah.
but there's going to be that one thing, that one segue that puts you into the unexplainable. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Right.
It doesn't mean that there isn't a power overhead. Legos are simple. You can build whatever you want with Legos, and then you can look at those and be like, oh, it's just Legos. You connect to bricks, but it doesn't tell you anything about the creator. Or rather, it tells you everything about the creator.
Mm.
Anyway,
No,
are you picking up on that?
Yes.
Are you picking up on that?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just making sure that I didn't.
I'm picking up the bricks
spout.
you're laying down.
But,
And I'm glad that you used the Lego movie to talk about that, because that's just a masterpiece.
you're right. Like
Mhm.
masterpieces.
Mm-hmm. That is
Yeah.
a miracle that movie was made.
You're right. That's such a good movie.
I think
like-
God had his hand in that creation.
I like
Yeah.
because, oh, such a good movie.
You're right.
That kind of makes me think of a personal anecdote of, kind of what we can't perceive. So last summer when I was a sophomore, and I was trying to apply for internships, and my resume was Arby's, camp counselor, and DoorDash. And I was going for an engineering job.
Wow.
The first one, zero experience. I applied to like 10 or 15 different places. Heard back no from like 5 of them. Never heard back from the other, 9. And then heard back from one saying, let's do a phone call. Let's just talk to you for 10 minutes, just figure out a couple things. And then, okay, we like the phone call. Let's go to an interview. And then from there, interview. Then a few weeks later, then they offered me the job. And I'm thinking, how in the world did I get this job? And so I was like, I must have been like the only one that applied. Like that had to be the natural explanation.
Yeah.
Like, because I am under, like, I still had the strengths of what the job would do, but like in terms of just like looking at my resume, like I was underqualified. Like I had finished camp counseling the summer prior.
No way you're underqualified.
Thank you. But God was not underqualified, because at the end of the
Mm.
summer,
Mhm.
my boss took me out to lunch. And so I was just curious. It was just like, so why me? Why'd you hire me? And, I didn't go into degrading myself with like Arby's and camp counselor. Not that those were bad things, but he said, well, there were about 5 or 6 others that applied, a few seniors, about to graduate. And, as we were just talking about things, your name just started to rise to the top. I'm like, I wasn't going to question. Like, what do you mean rise to the top? And I wasn't going to question it anymore. I was just like, okay, so, that wasn't me. And you said, you didn't really give me a whole reason about like, what about me? You just said, just as we were talking, your name just came up more. And it's like, well, thank you, God, very much.
It's a good name.
Yeah.
Like you're looking through a bunch of names and you have like Herbert Hoover. That'd be crazy. You have Herbert, Jimmy Johnson. I'm just naming presidents. And then Judson Page. You'd be like, you know what? I like this name. This guy seems attractive. Let's bring him in.
But thank you.
I didn't even mean to name 2 presidents. That's funny.
But still, just the fact that I got this job and there wasn't really an explanation that made sense. Like, I would imagine being one of these seniors and finding out that a sophomore, previously camp counselor, got this internship. I'd be really confused and I'd think, well, there can't be any natural explanation for that, so it must be something else.
Yeah.
And that something else felt like God.
So I found it, and this will be the last thing that I say about Legos. Okay. So I promise it'll be the last thing. This will make more sense because I was kind of jumpy. So you look at a bunch of different Lego sets and they have similarities and differences, right? Yeah. You know that somebody built those Lego sets. You can look at someone's creations that they've made and be like, oh yeah, like that's natural explanation. This guy built that Lego set. And then you'll look at one that is just off the walls, completely different than all the other ones. There's no like explanation. Like, where the heck did this come from? Do you not believe then that somebody still built that? Like, why can't somebody pick from the same Lego box and pick the pieces that are a little more abstract and then put those into a creation? Which is where in the modern world we come into these like, where on earth does this come from? And then why do we rule it out now as somebody who created it? Why do we assume that someone just took some glue and reached down into the bottom of the Lego box and then shook their hand around, pulled out, and then put it down? And that's some sort of natural weird thing that went on.
Yeah. And I really like your like analogy of the Legos because, and I don't want to pretend that this is my argument. This is not my argument. I believe Thomas Aquinas is the one who came up with like the, arguments for God, like the famous ones. Like we kind of talked about fine tuning, but like every creation has to have a creator, and so like there's a car. There's a car outside. Someone had to have created that car, and so like there are things it's like, how could this even be made? Like the rainbow that we were talking about, like how can this exist? Well, it exists in creation, therefore there had to be a creator. Well, a lot of times we don't think about that because it's like, well, I can't make that, how do I make a rainbow? That almost seems impossible. And that is why people believe that there is like a God, is because like in the world that we live in creation, there has to be a creator, just like how there's a creator for the car, there's a creator for this table that we're sitting at. There has to be a creator for the sky as well, and for the rainbow and stuff like that.
I absolutely agree with you. And I know I said it would be the last time, but it's like I can tell that this building is made out of wooden bricks. I can tell that the street is made out of concrete. That doesn't mean that there isn't like a whimsical knowledge that somebody laid the foundation. That somebody, I mean, just because there's a natural explanation for things does not mean that there is not a creator.
Yeah. I mean, even I think it was Stephen Hawking who said that, well, either there is some divine creator or there's a multiverse. And so like either we're just the one universe that has a creator or there's a multiverse. He later more thought the multiverse theory. But in one of our science and Christianity classes, I think there's some foreshadowing happening. We had a guest speaker, Dr. Siefkin, come in, physicist and chemist, and he talked about the chances, because there are governing forces over our world, so like gravity, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and the ratios that these are balanced is like so astronomically precise. Like if the gravitational constant was any bigger or any smaller, like stuff would either collide into each other or like spin out into eternity.
So it's almost like the knowledge of this makes it more.
And it was like the amount of multiverses, the amount of multiple universes there would have to be for ours to be that like 1 in a chance that that ratio turned out right was like 10 to the 5 with too many zeros that I lost track, or maybe it was like 10 to the 500, and that number is like so many zeros that you'd count until you're dead.
And why can't people just believe, Romans 1, man is without excuse, because like God's divine nature is shown throughout his creation.
Exactly.
I think it's so cool because I think that like obviously we're made in the image of God, and so we try to be like God, and in some ways like that's bad, some ways we try to be like God, and it's like, well, really, like we need to be submitting to God, but in some ways it's like how a son tries to be like, their dad, like you really look up to your dad,
Yeah.
and so you see your dad doing something, it's like, well, I want to do that too, and so like God obviously creates, God makes creation, and therefore we create too, and we know how to create because we see God's creation,
Yeah.
And we utilize the tools and the resources that he's given us. And I think that it's true with like laws as well. And I was just thinking about this while you were talking, Judd, that like we have these like laws of nature, of like gravity, and how gravity works. And like, you can probably think of more things, but there's like, I think we would describe that as like a law, and then we make our own laws.
Yeah.
Now we make laws like civil laws, but even those laws I think are based off of God's laws of like right and wrong,
Yeah.
and so I think that ties back into like the everything has a creator, and I think that is us like living into our image of God.
Yeah. And it seems to me that whenever humanity itself tries, like we're talking about, to play God in more of a super existential way, you know what I mean, with like the Tower of Babel. And I think now with like AI, I'm wondering, and that's my best guess, but I'm wondering now, like, what's our next Tower of Babel going to be? Like in Jurassic Park, it is them trying to play God by bringing back an extinct genome. You know what I mean?
I mean, people are doing that today with like mammoths and other things, trying to reintroduce fallen creatures back into certain environments.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, for sure.
So in talking about all these miracles, in the beginning, we kind of talked about how some miracles are off limits because it was just God and it felt like cheating, but that doesn't mean that they were any less cool.
Yeah.
And so taking a look at some of the things that Jesus did, which also, if you want to get better look at that, I would highly recommend John. The book of John really takes a look at Jesus's miracles as signs, the signs and wonders.
Facts.
And really does some fantastic stuff, turning water into wine, one of his first, showcasings. I love the idea of just like his mom was coming to him at this party and he was just like, we are all out of wine. Can you just do something about this? And he just said, woman, it's not my time. If I talked to my mom like that, like Jesus had some gumption.
I'd be over with.
But then he gave in anyway.
But it is interesting. It is interesting to me, the old adage about like, is this just a listen thing, or is this like, you want me to act? Do you want me to fix it or just listen? I wonder if Mary was like, I just want you to listen to me. I am, just talking. Or do you think she was like, can you really do something about this?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I can do something about it. And it wasn't just wine that he made. It was good wine.
It was really good wine. The best wine.
I just want to say, like, I think that hearing about that, like, it really makes me appreciate like the story of the Bible. I don't know, because I just made this parallel that like Mary is obviously the mother of Jesus, and Mary, as the mother, she brings Jesus into the world, but she also like brings Jesus into the
fold?
How I say it,
into the spotlight.
Yeah, kind of into the spotlight. Like she also brings his divinity into the spotlight, So she brings him into the world as the mother, but then also as the mother brings a whole aspect of Jesus that hasn't been being seen into the world. She brings that in as well.
Right.
I just think that that's an interesting kind of parallel that like I don't know if it would be I don't want it to sound like that she's the one like creating the divinity. You know, that's not what I'm saying. But like she like births Jesus, but then she also births his like his path, his ministry.
She was
Right.
the
You know?
catalyst. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, the catalyst. That's a great way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
I never realized that before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty cool considering that, thinking the way that God knows everything as it's happening. Like, because I try to fit my mind around, well, does God know everything before it's going to happen, or is that just my perspective? But like thinking in God's perspective of experiencing all time all at once,
Mm-hmm.
he is experiencing everything for the first time, but it's everything. So from our perspective, he's experiencing stuff before us because we're looking at time on a line, and he's standing in the middle of a circle. And so like I'd like to imagine like he knew that his mom was going to be like, hey, it's your time, but he knew it as it was happening. So I still imagine that there was surprise, and Jesus is just like,
Oh, for sure.
you're right, Mom, it is time.
I anticipate that it was whenever the Holy Spirit fell on him, that it was like a certain TV show that you and I have watched, Attack on Titan.
Oh yeah.
Whenever,
yeah.
so there's a part in the show basically where the plot lines up and he like touches someone's hand and kisses it, and like he activates a power in which he can see sort of his entire timeline in a linear circle, and he like goes pretty much insane. But I can imagine like whenever, except for like Jesus, obviously like he knew, but whenever the Holy Spirit fell on him, I imagine is whenever it first happened. So leading up into that point, he was probably like just going about his life as a man, knowing that he was Jesus. Of course, I think that the Lord gave him a certain amount of knowledge going in. But like, imagine if he grew up being like an 8-year-old kid, knowing he was going to get crucified. I don't think he had that knowledge at that point.
Interesting.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would say so.
I won't close that off. I won't say I don't think. I'd say I am inclined to lean the other way.
I would imagine, and I don't want to say either way because I don't know, and honestly I don't have a great way of knowing either way. But I would say that maybe he did know, but that was not what he was focused on, and it was more in the back of his mind because his time had not yet come.
Yeah.
And because he still, spoke when he was a child, he spoke with the priests and the elders, and they were fascinated by his knowledge and his wisdom at that age. So he still had that in there. And so I'd like to imagine that some part of him knew, but not in the same way that he knew, in his, when he was like 30 and knew like, all right, it's going to happen. But, so I think like he knew, but it was just in the back of his mind because that was not the focus at this point. That was not the goal. The goal was to live and, learn carpentry, like creator. He's God and he does carpentry. So he's literally building things.
That's true. Yeah. I used to think that carpentry meant laying carpets. Like I thought he was a carpenter.
I think that he probably did know that he was going to die, and probably I think that he knew that he was going to be crucified, because we see even like while Jesus is ministering to people, in the Gospels, like Jesus like foreshadowing, like his death.
Yeah.
And so like he obviously knew that he was going to die at that time, and so I think that it would then be true that like he would know earlier than that. I was gonna say something about that, but it's okay. Yeah, because that's his mission here on earth. His mission here was to save us from our sins.
Yeah.
God, like the whole biblical narrative is like leading up to God redeeming his creation through the Savior.
Yeah.
And so that is Jesus's mission, and I think that Jesus knew that, especially because like we don't believe that Jesus was just like, here, like Jesus didn't exist. It was just like God the Father, and then like Jesus was like born. Like we believe that Jesus was always here, even like from creation.
Oh yeah, that's what it says. I mean, by him, through him.
Yeah, and so I think that Jesus knew that like even as a child. And I think that he was a child, like I still think that because he was fully human and fully God. But so maybe like the way that he would have like expressed what his mission was would be different than like the way that he expressed it whenever he's like 30 years old. But I think that he knew that he was going to die on the cross, because that is why he was born into this world.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I definitely see what you're saying. And yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. I just I don't know, I think it's really interesting, the relationship between humanity and divinity
Mhm.
that we see in Jesus, because I want to know like how human he was. Like whenever he was a little kid, did he like go to bed exactly on time every single night? Like he was away from his parents for 3 days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were looking for him everywhere,
Mhm.
and they couldn't find him. And he was like, "Why? Like, what's the big deal?" Like that's such an average teenage answer. Like, what's such a big deal? So, I want to know the exact like measure of humanity that we saw in Jesus, like 100%, which is 100% man, but also 100% God, which
Yeah.
they seem so like opposite poles. Like you could never put them together, but Jesus was that.
Yeah.
So his knowledge, his foreknowledge, or his like lack of knowledge that would come with being human, like how do those two play together? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it's also with that taking a look back at us, because going back to the idea of miracles, we see Jesus do all these miraculous things, walk on water. And like I love the artistic depictions of like Jesus standing above the water, reaching his hand down to pull us out like he did for Simon. And
Mhm. Mhm.
it's like truly just awe-inspiring, and people think it was like, well, that kind of stuff doesn't happen today, or that's God, that's cheating, but
Yeah.
like we said, I think that being made in God's image, and when we proclaim the name of Jesus over us, that a little bit of that divinity, a little bit of that channeling of God's wisdom through us, God's power through us happens. And so into your question of the humanity and the divinity uh, of Jesus, I like to think that he came down, one, I think, also to kind of experience what it was like. Like, yes, he knew how he experienced, but to really feel it, I like to think that he, in his 33 years, experienced the fullness of every human emotion. So he experienced complete sadness and despair, when his friend Lazarus died, when his cousin John died, like complete, like just down on his knees sobbing. He also experienced the greatest uplift of joy. I imagine, all the festivals, or being with his mom, or being with Joseph, his earthly father, those times of togetherness. And so he experienced the complete range, and even to the cross, one of the most excruciatingly painful ways you can die, just trying to breathe as you splinter your flogged back, as your hands and feet are pierced. Like, he came down to experience the fullness of it, but then also to show us what we can do, because he said, when I'm gone, you guys are going to do signs and wonders.
Yeah.
Like we talked about Pentecost, like the Acts of the Apostles, the miracles and complete amazing things that they did after Jesus went back up into heaven. We can do those same things. Now, they might look different. But still, that does not mean that through prayer and uh, faith that we cannot, do those same works, but they just take on a different form. And so we have to recognize what that looks like.
For sure.
Well, anyway, so this has been a really fun episode.
Agreed.
Diving in, it's been really great having you, Nick, able to talk.
Excuse me.
Have another one of our theological friend minds weigh in on stuff. It's been a lot of fun, and also just really great to kind of sit back and let somebody else do the thinking for a minute while we collect our thoughts.
You guys think that it's just Judd and I that have these conversations. No. Nick seeks out these conversations. So he's sort of a third party that we don't typically see. And I don't know if we've mentioned definitely Nick on the show.
Yeah.
But it's your first time having you on, and we'd like to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you guys for inviting me on. You guys know I love talking about theology and stuff like that. So Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing your Theo thoughts.
Yeah. Anyway, so if you've been watching the series, again, the results for the final showdown, go to the Instagram starting this next week and vote, and then we will reveal the results in 1 week to see who won out of the Miracle Madness, the parting of the Red Sea, or the fall of Jericho.
All right. Can't wait to see.
And please check out the other episodes in the previous series, rounds 1 and 2, and you can watch or listen on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, radio, TikTok, Instagram, all of, if there's media, we're on it. Just look up Theo Thoughts. There's just one and only.
Yeah.
And let us know what you think. We talked about a lot of miracles. We want to know what are some of your favorite miracles, even some that we missed. We talked about different stuff, but more of the idea of miracles. But again, we love hearing your Theo Thoughts too.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm Judson Page.
I'm Jordan Peternell.
I'm Nick Christ.
Love y'all. God bless.